I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're back in 25 and live in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, everybody, Happy New Year, and welcome to 2025, Lanny.
That's amazing. Can't believe I made it this long.
Yeah, it is. I can remember when we worried about the computers turning over to 2000.
Yeah, 1999. Turn them off before you go to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 25 years ago. It's crazy.
It really is.
Seems like yesterday.
So, first podcast of 2025.
Let's make it a good one.
Let's make it. And how many of these things we done now?
I think this is like 285.
Wow.
He knows exactly.
Yeah, you guys-
He knows
Because
exactly.
it may be in the 290s.
Really?
Mac, why don't you fact check us on that if you will? So over here we've got Man Liquor Mac.
Mac,
How is that
Thatcher.
star shooting, Mac?
Yeah.
Have you shot it at all? Just give me some hand signals there.
No, I haven't shot it yet. So, I mean, I've been taking Wilkes, and, I mean, we've been just learning. I mean, sitting in the shooting house, trying to chase some squirrels, walking around. I mean,
That's so much fun to me.
I went the other day. I was telling Laney, I went the other day, had an afternoon where he didn't go with me, and I was back at my house before dark. I felt like I was doing something wrong.
Yeah, you feel like you're betraying them when not having them with you. Well, it's that stage you're talking about. It's that wonderment of wildlife. Daniel said it best, wonderment of wildlife, that stage where everything they see they're excited about and they're wanting to learn and everything else. So it's good. Then you get to my stage where they know everything. I know. But anyways.
You start explaining something to them, and they just shut
They
you
know.
down.
Yeah, they know. Oh, I know. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. They're all fun ages.
Yeah, it is
You
fun.
guys
It's nothing
are-
like, it's a great time of year to spending time in the woods with your family. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So-
I got my wife in the deer stand the other day.
Look at
and,
you out at
we
the
had
place.
at the new place.
At the
and
place.
She read her book, and I was looking through binoculars hunting, and so
Good for you.
Quality time.
I still can't get her to pull the trigger, but we're working on that.
Well, just getting her to go with you that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we were looking at birds, and great time.
Yeah, it's smart to engage her in the new project there.
Mm-hmm.
Very smart.
You
Had the
had,
heater running,
you had Bobby Cole's guide service running last week, didn't you?
Yeah, to no avail. No.
Well.
It was a tough. I don't know what it was, but historically those dates right after Christmas are really good for me.
Yeah.
But while Jessie and her new husband Josh were here, I could not put them on a deer.
You didn't gar hole.
Not on purpose. Anyway. They got gar hole, but not on purpose. So no, hopefully I still got to get her a deer. She's going to be pretty disappointed in the season. So. Puts a lot of pressure on.
It does put a lot of pressure on you.
So
I feel you.
Well, blood on the biologic. There's been quite a few.
Quite a few.
Blaney, you want to start
Yeah,
off?
Harmon Rayleigh, Jess's son here, harvested a good deer out at Carnathan. Yeah, go Harmon. Also, Max Redden, one of our MDWFP buddies' sons, killed a good buck too. So,
Heck yeah.
all kind of good stuff going on. And our fearless podcast leader is on the board again. I would say.
Yeah.
Fearless is right.
Yeah,
Look, let's wrap this. Let's go ahead, and I'll tell you a little bit about the story.
Yeah.
So, Dudley, who have you got?
Yeah, so a young hunter got his first buck, a really nice 11-point, a.k.a. Spike.
Oh,
good-looking deer.
Love those.
George Luke, son of my buddy Caleb Luke. We did some stuff at their Neshoba County Fair cabin this year. Went and shot the horse races and stuff like that. Really cool family. So congrats to you, George.
All right.
Mac, what you got?
So one of my best friends, James Morgan, his daughter killed her first deer. It was an 8-point over in around Greenwood. Her name's Mary Hiram Morgan. She's in second grade. Killed it on, I think, December 21st. And she and I share the same birthday. So,
Look at you.
I know. So
Happy birthday,
I remember when she was born.
How about that? Well, Mark Olis from, he was a guest here a few weeks ago. He killed a really nice deer. Saw him on that. And look, I've got to ask, Richie, what are the Davenports?
What's going on?
Yeah, we dropped a few this weekend or over
I
the
hear
holidays.
ya.
Yeah, we dropped a few.
So you got some blood.
A few. I love this.
Yeah, so my girls, went and got some. My oldest Eva went by herself. She dropped some some one afternoon while me and little guy Dylan were in over another food plot, and but yeah, we got some meat over the holidays.
Good
So
for
it
y'all.
was good.
Excellent.
So she's hunting solo.
Yep. And I had just passed her up a 30-30.
Oh, nice.
Moved her up to a 30-30, and it was a 30-30 that I grew up on.
Yeah.
It was it's like my great uncle's 30-30 and stuff, and so it's been in the family a long time. And I literally had just given, and she that was her first hunt on that with that 30-30.
That
That's
first
cool.
all by myself.
That's a
deer,
big deal.
Yeah, she was pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So it
Well,
was,
good for you.
Yeah, it worked out.
Glad you got some meat in the freezer. I was getting worried about you.
No, we'll work it out one way or another.
Good for you, Richie. Well, guys, we have a new sponsor, Water Feather Boats.
Well, we needed that thing this week, didn't
We needed that yesterday.
we? We sure did.
in a bad way.
Yeah.
I've been looking at that contraption for months on Instagram. What a neat unit that is.
Yeah, it's like a one-person little mini kayak you duck hunt out of and scoot across a little small place. I'm telling you, if we'd have had it yesterday.
That would have been perfect for what we went through.
So
Sure would.
yesterday, I ended up making a bad shot on a deer, and I can't find him. And we call in our friend Zach Crowley, and he brings his son Dagan and their dog Daya.
Daya, who is
Unbelievable.
unbelievable. She really is.
And she finds the deer. And in the process of finding the deer, we find out the deer is still alive. And she bays him. And I assume there's a fight going on. It's just so much chaos. You can hear Lanny heard all the barking. And so Dagan takes off. I say, go kill the deer. Don't let him hurt your dog. And all this Dudley, we're right on the edge of this big creek. And I mean a big creek. It's the Succotanche.
And it's been raining.
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually got some rain, yeah.
So
Wet in the bottom.
we see the deer take off running, the dog's after him, and he drops down the bank. And I think Lanny got there about the same time Dagan did.
Yeah.
And anyway, Dagan was smart enough to let the buck swim the creek and get out. As he's getting out on the other side, he puts a killing shot on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I get an assist on this one.
Yeah.
But the deer slides back down into the creek.
Yes.
wow.
And all that's sticking out is the antlers.
The left side. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the dog, Day is over there trying to, she's
Wrestle
pulling
with
on
him.
the ear.
Yeah.
And every time she pulls, the deer slips a little bit lower in that water into the current.
And that was a lot of current.
And it was.
Yeah, I was surprised that somebody didn't have to get wet earlier than they did.
Lanny wanted to swim. I wouldn't let him.
Yeah.
And I just got
yeah.
really nervous about that. So I ran home and got a kayak. And guys, I should have never trusted Lanny with my life.
I didn't
in a
know you
kayak.
had such good kayak skills. As much as I tried to tump you over, you got some pretty good boat skills, Bobby.
Well, they lowered me down, Dudley. They tied a rope on the back
A
of this
steep
kayak.
creek bank.
Yeah, that's tough when it's steep like that.
We tied two hunter safety
Safety
lines together, and off I went. And I could not turn around. I was balanced to. If I'd have had a penny in another pocket,
I
it would've
cannot
turned me
believe
over.
you made it.
But halfway across this thing, all of a sudden the kayak just stops. Boom, and it won't go any further. And Lanny's hollering, paddle harder, paddle harder. And I'm giving it all I got, and I can't go anywhere. And fortunately, one of the guys that's there doesn't know Lanny's a prankster and says, Lanny, you're standing on the rope.
Of course I am. I have to give you credit, though. I mean, you look like a Class 5 kayaker. I mean, nose first off the bank into the creek. Water comes over the nose. He bounces out and gets all the way across the creek to the deer.
And
Until then he flips over when he gets to the other side.
I did flip it. I did flip it. And fortunately, it wasn't but about waist deep right there. But then we got the antlers tied. I got a rope tied on there. That took a lot more. That was a lot more effort than I thought. And then I don't know how, but Lanny got him pulled back across the
Oh,
creek.
yeah. No, it was. We had just enough rope with the stick that we used, so worked out pretty good.
It was
a
quite
great
an
deer.
adventure.
That was a great time. That's for sure.
It was one of those days where everything went wrong until everything went right. It was
It all
just
worked out.
Really, really cool. But if we'd have had a water feather boat, it would have made things.
Yeah, we'd have been back in time to have some tacos.
Yeah. All right. So what do we have any other blood we need to?
Daniel Hayes killed a good buck too with his bow. That's a good one too. Yeah. Over the holiday, and I think that's all I can remember.
Yeah.
WD
Congrats, Dano.
Yeah.
So congrats on that, and everybody. Y'all got if you want to be mentioned on the Blood and Biologics, just
Tag us.
somehow
Yeah.
email us or
Email us, tag us. I don't
hashtag or
know.
something.
How
Hashtag
they do
blood
that,
on the
Matt?
biologic.
We can give out your
Give us
cell
a
phone
hat.
number.
Yeah,
Dudley,
just
at the end.
just call Dudley.
So look, guys, I'm looking up at the screen, and through the magic of the internet, we've got a young lady on here, Dr. Emily Belser. And I got a bio from her. She went to Clemson. She went to the University of Georgia. She went to Texas A&M at Kingsville. She's got
All
more
the good
degrees than a thermometer. And it's all wildlife oriented. And Emily, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for being
Well,
here.
thank you. Glad to be here.
And did I introduce you correctly? Hopefully I said Dr. Emily Belser. I want to
You
make sure
did.
you get the credit because that's a lot of effort
That's
to
a
get that
lot.
PhD.
That is, no doubt about it.
It was a lot.
Well, has it been worth it?
Yeah, so far it has. Learned a lot. Great experience.
Just having those. I mean, we have a lot of doctors on. I don't know that we've ever had anybody on here that's delivered a baby, but we've had a lot of doctors on here, a lot of wildlife doctors on
That's
here.
true.
So
That's true.
we learn from you guys every time we have you on. So I get excited to have smart people on here because look
Because
what
we're
I'm
not real smart.
look
yeah.
what I'm surrounded with. I mean.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us just a bit about what you kind of focused on? And I've got a bunch of questions these guys have,
Yeah.
and we'll get started. But let's learn a little bit about you first,
Yeah.
Emily.
So my dad took me hunting from when I was really young, and he's a forester. So I kind of followed in his footsteps, kind of veered a little bit, went more towards wildlife than forestry, but y'all know they go hand in hand. So I went to Clemson for my undergrad and majored in wildlife and fisheries biology. And kind of a fun fact, I actually wanted to be a doctor, like a people doctor. But then I decided that people are kind of gross. And I really enjoyed the wildlife major. So I just kind of stuck with that. And then I got my master's at the University of Georgia under Dr. Carl Miller. My project was on brain abscesses, actually with Dr. now, Brad Cohen. I think y'all had him on the other week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he and I were on the same project together. And then from there, I went to Texas A&M Kingsville and got my PhD studying the effects of how changing deer density and changing supplemental feeder density can affect deer behavior and how much feed they consume in a nutshell. And then at the end of my PhD, I'd already done all my classwork and all of my research. And so I was kind of in that data analysis writing phase. And I took a job with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So I was the regional biologist for that area, for the Kingsville area. And so I worked there for a couple years. Loved Texas, loved my job there. Great thing about Texas, it's a target-rich environment. So for a wildlife biologist like me, it's great. But it just never was quite home. And so I ended up taking a job with Georgia DNR after 2 years there. So I worked as a DMAP or deer management program biologist there for about almost 5 years. And then decided to go out on my own and do wildlife consulting and real estate, specializing in land sales. So I moved back home, back in with the parents last year. So I've been working on that for the past year. So that's my history
Nice.
in a nutshell.
So, did you grow up a hunter?
I did, yeah.
Can you remember
Yeah.
your first buck?
I do. It was actually a button buck, technically.
Mine too.
Yeah,
That was my
I
first
was in that-
deer. Yeah, it was kind of cool. I harvested him. We always went to my dad's hunt club for Thanksgiving, and I harvested him that weekend. And my dad actually had harvested his first deer on Thanksgiving weekend on the same property,
Nice.
like back when he was really young. So it was really special.
That is cool.
That's great. It really amazes me where, a wildlife or forestry degree can take somebody.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just so broad, even broader than they teach in school, just all the different directions you can go with that, from even real estate,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you mentioned.
So,
Yeah.
Emily, we want to talk about antlers and antler abnormalities, but listening to some of the things that you know so much about, I want to first off ask questions about there seems to be, like, if you've got a feeder out, there's kind of like all of a sudden a hierarchy kind of develops around that feeder, and it seems like there's a lot of drama around them. Can you kind of tell me what's going on there? Is it? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I think there's just that some of them are meaner than others, but what's going on for the most part?
Yeah, I think deer are, we try to generalize deer. It makes, in our minds, we try to say, oh, well, every buck is aggressive and every doe is not, or something like that. There really is no average deer. I think deer have personalities, same as we people do. So, like, some does might be more aggressive than others, but there are traits that make deer more aggressive. So, in general, bucks are more aggressive than does. They're going to be more dominant at feed sites. Does that are lactating tend to be more aggressive. They're going to be, especially at a feeder, because they really want access to that resource because their nutritional demands are so high. And generally, the feeder provides a great place for us to observe all those interactions because it's bringing a bunch of deer into one spot. But if you sit in a deer stand, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it even, away from a feeder, you're still going to have some of those interactions, just in a food plot or in the woods. It still happens, but.
Yeah, and you see does rear
I
up
see
at
a lot.
each other.
Yeah, a lot of
in
does are
food
pretty
plots and
aggressive
stuff.
and protective. Yeah, and then it's interesting too. Yesterday we were watching a group of deer and the posturing. The young ones with their heads low in their ears. Trying to kind of be respecting, easing on in there. Where the big does are like, hey,
Yeah.
watch it.
And it's fun. Sometimes you can, like, being on a field and you can watch, and it's almost like they see a deer they've never seen before, and they're all staring at it
Yeah.
like, who is that?
Oh, they're gonna try to come over here and eat. Mm-mm.
I mean, they don't have as many rules as we do and morals. They're just trying to get their next meal
Yeah, trying to
and live to
survive.
the next day.
Yeah.
So, it's a little bit more deer eat deer, I guess you could say. You even see that at a bird feeder, the competition.
Yeah. So, Emily, one more question. Do you, in your experience in Texas, did you notice weight gain or any antler increase in size when those guys were supplemental feeding a protein feed? Do you think it was worth it?
Worth it would depend on your budget.
There you go.
Um,
Direct
so
correlation
to
there.
do it properly, you'd have to spend a lot of money. So the research project that I was a part of, the Comanche Faith Project, it had a couple of phases to it. So it was a really long project. So the first 10 years they had 200-acre enclosures where deer had access to supplemental feed, and they had enclosures where deer didn't have access to supplemental feed. And before I say this, keep in mind, this is South Texas. This is a semi-arid environment, very different from a lot of the rest of the country. And right, the vegetation response is huge on rainfall. So in good rainfall years, the vegetation is going to be better, but in drought years, supplemental feed can really have a big impact and help carry deer over during those drought years. But as far as antler size, I think they had a difference of antlers were 16% larger in enclosures that had access to feed versus those that didn't. And I believe body size was bigger as well. I came on for the second phase where we had feeders in every enclosure and we changed the density of feeders. But
And
a lot of really cool stuff from that first phase.
And with the supplemental feeding, is that just them having access to a high protein feed at all times, or was it fed specific
Yes.
times during the day?
No, this was ad libitum. So we kept those feeders full 24/7 every day. They didn't run out, or
Right.
if they did, we got in trouble.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. So 125-inch deer.
Times 1.16.
Yeah. What my calculator here is not.
You take your shoes off so you can use your toes.
Times 1.16. So a 125-inch deer would become a 145-inch deer. Basically, that seems significant to me.
No, it is significant for sure. I would think.
I'd be interested
It's
to
go
see
ahead.
a study of, like prime early successional habitat present versus feeding.
Well, on a good rain year, yeah. I mean, you'd probably get compounded on top of that if they're feeding on native forage too. It's interesting to me that, isn't it that the line is 16 to 18% to have a quality deer herd of readily available, or 16 to 18% protein forage for them to reach their genetic potential.
Let's ask her.
Isn't that it's kind of the rule of thumb now?
It is, yeah. You want their diet needs to be about 16 to 18% protein.
And it's
That's what they need for good maximum antler growth. And anything beyond that, they'll just probably convert to fat, which is also good.
So it's interesting that it's a 16% threshold for quality, and they grew 16%. That's the only point I was making.
Ah.
Oh, look at there.
Yeah.
I love the sound effects.
Yeah.
Richie's on the board
Yeah,
over
okay.
there.
He's only got one. So.
Yeah. He's usually asleep over there.
Maybe two. He's got two. So, Emily, what we wanted to ask, and this is a starting point, there's no telling where this will go, but around the country, are there areas that have different antler abnormalities that, like South Georgia has something going on over there? Well, Jeff Foxworthy's farm, we always hear about these
abscesses, wasn't it abscesses?
Brain abscesses and stuff. Is that something that does different parts of the country have stuff like this occurring?
As far as antler abnormalities specifically, not that I know of, but you are very correct in the fact that brain abscesses or cranial abscesses can cause antler abnormalities, and brain abscesses specifically are kind of concentrated in certain areas or pockets, for sure.
So Jeff's deer, that county's deer, I think that's Harris County.
Yeah,
they were stocked from Wisconsin. And does that same thing happen in Wisconsin?
Yeah, and that's actually what some of our research showed. Brad actually did a lot of digging, and so when we first started that project, we knew some areas in Georgia specifically had brain abscesses where other properties had never seen one. And some of the properties that had them seemed to get a lot of them, even up to like 30% of their bucks would have them. And so we kind of tried to figure out why this was. And so the bacteria that causes it, and this was my part of the research, is we swabbed deer. So we swabbed their head, nose, and tongue. And then I did PCR, so a bunch of boring lab work to see which deer had this bacteria. And they actually had the bacteria all across Georgia, whether the property had brain abscesses or not. But what the difference was, and what Brad found, was that certain strains of the bacteria were more virulent. So they had certain factors about them that made them more dangerous. So like it allowed the bacteria to be able to cling to a host cell better and cause disease. And so from there, Brad did a little digging into the history of restocking in Georgia. So back in the 60s, and in some of the other states too, to supplement deer populations, they brought in deer from a lot of times from other states. Fun fact, South Carolina, where I'm from, only moved deer within the state, but Georgia brought deer from within the state, and then also from Texas and Wisconsin are the two big ones, and maybe some other areas. But Brad found that in places that deer were stocked with deer from Wisconsin, those areas actually had a lot more brain abscesses than areas that were stocked with deer from within Georgia or deer from Texas.
Weren't the deer at Jeff's farm, and I know you're talking about brain abscesses, it seemed like part of their pedicle would start growing down into their brain. Is that
maybe so? Yeah, and maybe when they shed, there was like a chunk of the pedicle that, like a part of the skull, came off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really common with brain abscesses. I think obviously what causes the abnormality isn't necessarily the infection, but the way that the infection affects the pedicle. So it's some sort of damage to that area. So for sure, when they has that abnormal abscission layer from the antler shedding, that can definitely affect the pedicle so that the antler grows back funky.
Hey guys, listen up. let me tell you about an awesome deal Springfield Armory is offering now through the end of 2024. When you purchase a brand new model 2020 Waypoint or Redline rifle, you'll receive a model 2020 rimfire rifle with a black synthetic stock absolutely free. That's an over $400 value on the house. You know we love Springfield Armory and their top-notch products you'd be proud to hand down to your kids and grandkids. So why wait? Learn more about this incredible offer at GearUp2024.com. Springfield Armory. Defend your legacy.
See these people? When the clock strikes 5, it's not the end. It's just the beginning. They have to do these things. They have to do those things. Enter the all-new LS Tractor MT2 and MT2E, a relentless force of innovation. Redesigned with a new hood and cab built for comfort and visibility, with enhanced lifting capacity to get the job done. Making these people the ones everyone else calls those people. Visit your local LS Tractor dealer today.
It's still a little bit confusing to me. You know, for years they would, everybody would say, you know, you got deer with, you know, one side of their antler is messed up. You know, you need to cull it. It's genetic. And then you would say, well, they just got it. They just had something damaged and it might fix itself. But so there really are areas where this was much more concentrated. And you guys found that it was indeed some of it from Wisconsin. So, I mean, is that genetic? I mean, so is it you said it's the strain of bacteria is everywhere, but certain strains are worse. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So, but it has to be deer from a certain area, and then it has to be infected with this bacteria that is worse, that is not everywhere, apparently.
Yeah, so the bacteria Trooperella pogenes is on, what we found is that it was on deer all across Georgia, but there were just certain areas that had a more, I guess, dangerous strain of the same bacteria.
Okay. But it was able to affect the Wisconsin deer more so than the indigenous deer?
I don't know that it has to do with the genetics of the Wisconsin deer. I think what happened was the deer from Wisconsin, when they brought them in, they had that more virulent strain on them. And so over time, they spread it to the local deer. So I don't know that it had a deer genetic issue.
But it was brought in by the Wisconsin strain.
And I want to say they also identified something similar nearby here, like in Kemper County. A listener may be able to chime in on that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
But I'm sure are there other pockets of this where this is more prevalent?
There are, I think, there was some research done before us. I want to say it was Maryland. There's some published research from Maryland where they seem to find a lot of brain abscesses up there as well.
So, Emily, what occurred in Kemper County, if my memory serves me correctly, is we were having a lot of deer that would have one branched antler, just perfect, just like you would expect, and the other side would be a spike. And it seemed like an abnormal amount of these. It's
not just Kemper County. I mean, we've got them all
here.
over
Oh, sure.
Here.
Yeah. So what could be, if we see that deer and let's just say he's a 3.5, but that one branch looks great. Can we expect that the next year that the other side will fill out, or what's going on there?
So what I usually tell landowners that I work with when they have that same situation, I usually tell them, give them 2 years. So if they have one abnormal antler this year, wait until next year, see if it still comes back kind of funky. And if it does, and you need to harvest bucks, especially in whatever age category he is, then go ahead and take it. But I wouldn't harvest it in that first year. I would let him make it to the next year to see, because sometimes they can recover. So it's really hard to tell exactly why an antler is growing abnormally. I'm sure y'all have heard where if a deer injures his back leg, the opposite antler will grow in funky the next year. And so, it could have been, it could be something like that. He could have had some sort of injury that he was able to recover from. His antler could have suffered an injury during the growth phase, so it may have been injured during velvet. And so obviously that's not going to affect his antler the following year. It'll just be that year. So I usually tell landowners, wait till the second year before making that harvest decision.
I vaguely remember from an old article I read that about 70% of the time it is supposed to, grow back normally, and roughly 30% of the time that sticks, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So we've got I'm sure Bronson Strickland over here. We have him from time to time. I want to say he told me that sometimes that when a deer sheds, casts his antlers, that there's this raw spot, that pedicle is just raw, and that sometimes that there might become an infection, and that would be what that spike was on that side. But hopefully during the year he gets through that infection, and next year he would go back to normal. I'm pretty sure that's the way Bronson explained that could potentially happen. You're nodding your head here, Emily. This is a radio show.
If he said it, I'm going to agree with it.
Well, it's interesting too. He had a study, I believe, and correct me because I'm often wrong, but he had a study in Texas where there was a malformed deer, and they kept him on a supplemental feed, and I think in year 6 or 7 he turned into an absolute giant. Now I could be getting that conversation wrong, but in the conversation about antler abnormalities, I thought he brought that up. It's interesting too because we have a lot of I call them half-rack deer here. We got a super high deer density too, so we're always aggressively, shooting antlerless deer. But we've kind of, especially with a lot of our young hunters now, we've like Bobby was saying, if they're 3.5 and they're still got a half-rack, we're letting a lot of those get harvested now. And you think that's a smart move?
Yeah, I mean, if you just need to take out more deer, then yeah, go ahead and harvest them. But I wouldn't harvest it just because he has one abnormal antler.
Yeah.
But if you need to take deer in that age class, then
that's
go
the one
for
to
it.
take. Good.
So Emily, the most deer, if just a standard whitetail buck, does he just want to be an 8-point? And then I mean is that kind of the norm? But then all of a sudden you might have some that are framed up to be a 10 or more, and those are just something special about them. Can I have that right in my mind?
Yeah, I mean, 8 points are definitely the majority of deer, and then you get some 10s and the exceptional 12s and up. But yeah, I think most deer are 8 points. But that the maximum number of points they have is determined by genetics, and then there's a whole bunch of other factors. But ultimately, it is affected by genetics.
There's a bell-shaped curve floating around on social media right now that shows that, and it's all over. Folks have been sharing it, but yeah, I mean the majority of mature deer are, just average 8 points. I think in Mississippi, an average mature buck, 4+ is going to be 125 inches, and so these 150s and 160s are off in this category on the side where very, very low percentage of them get like that.
So Emily, does certain areas of the country, are they more predisposed to having non-typical racks than others? And
I'm not sure.
I asked that question because there's a county in Alabama, Greene and Hale County. It seems like they just grow a lot of non-typical deer there, but it could be just, as Toxie would say, anecdotal. But I just wonder.
But I always think, the weird looking young deer, if they do get enough nutrition and they get enough age class on them, they can be some of the coolest ones there are.
There's a lot of mounted deer in this office.
Yeah, there are.
I don't know if we have any, but you often find where it looks like an acorn at the tip of the antler point. Do you have any idea on how that happens?
So I've asked that same question, and most of the answers I've gotten is it was either maybe some sort of injury as the antler was growing, or maybe even like an insect bite, but I am not sure.
That's what we've always thought.
Yeah.
We don't have any proof for it, just like nothing else. But
Yeah, and sometimes you'll have like a little indention, like a little hole going back in them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting aspects. They're so unique. I think that's what makes us love them so much. Is everyone's a little bit different.
oh, they're just such amazing animals. I mean, it can grow over 100 inches of bone on its head in a matter of really weeks. It's pretty crazy.
And occasionally you'll run across one like Jeff Lindsay recently killed one. The body size of the deer wasn't even in proportion. The antlers were huge, and the deer had a smaller body. And then sometimes you see them just the opposite: great big bodies and not much in the antler.
That's what I always see.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of our life story around here.
Yeah.
Wow, man, he wasn't didn't have a good rack, but he weighed a lot.
Just when you guys are studying the antlers and whatnot, I keep kind of coming back to this, trying to think. If I'm a gamekeeper out here and I'm trying to improve my property, are there things that you've learned through the years that you think a guy can do that really would help with antler development and would try to put on a few more inches of antler on their deer?
Oh man, how much time do we have?
Oh, all right. Yeah, we got a lot of time for this one.
No, I mean, ultimately it comes down to nutrition is one thing for sure that you can change, and deer density. So if you've got a lot of really good, plentiful nutrition, then the deer are going to be able to maximize on that and ultimately grow bigger antlers. And part of that Comanche Fates study, you've heard, this might also open another can of worms, but you've heard of people wanting to harvest spikes. In that Comanche Fates study, the first phase, they found that bucks that didn't have access to feed, there was a higher percentage of the yearlings had spikes as antlers. And if you got into the enclosures where deer had access to feed, you would get more branch antlered bucks as yearlings. And so that really speaks to how much nutrition can affect antler size, even at a young age. And so making sure that you've got enough nutrition and food out there on the landscape. And I'm not just talking about supplemental feed, I'm talking about managing your habitat. If you're growing good food plots, and you don't even have to have food plots to do it, but if you're managing that native habitat, getting food and sunlight on the ground within deer reach, that's going to be key. That's something that people can manage for. And you can also manage for your deer density. It might be a little bit more difficult to do on smaller acreages, but especially on your larger properties, deer density can be managed. And you don't want to have your deer density so high because it can cause stress on bucks and does. That stress alone could have an effect on antler size. We didn't necessarily find that in our study as far as deer density, but they had access to feed, so they had plenty of food. And so it was a little hard to tease out that part of it. But yeah, managing for that deer density and managing for a good buck to doe ratio. So if your buck to doe ratio gets too skewed one way or the other, if you have way too many bucks and you're not enough does to be bred, you could be increasing the amount of fighting among deer. So that could affect, not just directly, bucks fighting and breaking off antlers, but long term, that could affect the antlers.
Mac, you got a question?
Yeah. So on a deer density side of things, how long does it take for you to get to the sweet spot? To get to your correct deer density? I mean, does it take, I guess it depends on how fast you can shoot them. But I mean, how long do you typically see that take to see an effect on the body weights and the antlers and things like that?
So as far as just getting your deer density where you want it, that won't take too terribly long at all, as long as you've got enough tags, enough people to shoot deer. Now, I've worked with much larger, like huge properties where they kind of have struggled to shoot enough deer, just getting enough people, enough bullets to shoot enough deer. But generally for most landowners, you can get it done in a season or two, ideally, if you really work at it. But as far as seeing the results of that, that could possibly take up to several generations of deer. Because we know Mississippi State did a study, and y'all may already be familiar with it, where they actually showed that a doe's nutrition can affect her fawn production and ultimately antler size after that and body size. And so, and that can accumulate over generations. So it could take, I don't know, 10 to 15 years if it needed to.
Hey, Lanny.
Hey, Bobby.
Have you ever wondered if your feeder went off or if it's even got corn in it?
Yeah, you sit there at night wondering about it.
Moultrie has solved this. This is some high-tech stuff.
Fits on any feeder that helps monitor the level of feed and lets you know if it went off or not. And you can remotely control it.
Can I look at your feeder if we're on the hub?
I really hope not, but we're going to have to talk to the guys at Moultrie about that. This is the biggest thing in feeders since corn.
That's saying a lot.
With Feed Hub, there's no more stressing, no more guessing. This technology allows you to remotely monitor your feeders.
You know, we always say feed safely, do it the right way.
No doubt about it.
To learn more about it, visit moultrieproducts.com/feedhub. It's a great invention.
Unbelievable technology and products brought to us by our buddies at Moultrie.
I might say, oh, I've only got 40 acres or I've only got 100 acres. At what, I guess, size level farm could you make an effect on that as far as your deer density? Like, I mean, you don't want to go shoot 20 deer on a 40-acre tract, but I mean, if you shoot 20 on 1,000 acres, it might not be enough.
Right. I would say maybe between 400 acres or more is really where you might concentrate on focusing on deer density. But even if you have less than that, you can still manage for deer density. The biggest thing will be working with your landowners around you. So getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I would think that could vary quite a bit just based on the terrain and habitat. You know, if you're a 40-acre square in the middle of 2,000 acres of cattle pastures, you know, that might be different than a 40-acre patch in the middle of timberland or something. You know, it's just going to vary.
So
Interesting.
Emily, that the way I understand it is that if you do all this work and improve this habitat, and the doe is going to suddenly realize, hey, there's a lot to browse here, a lot of nutrition, and she sends some kind of signal that her fawns could pick up that says this is a great place, and that triggers them to maybe release more something to help antler development. And so, have I got that right? And so, subsequent generations realize that there's enough food here, and they develop larger antlers as a result of that.
Yeah, I think it kind of can be somewhat explained by epigenetics. And so, our DNA is the same. We can't change our DNA, but certain things can basically flip. So like our DNA is going to call for maybe like A or B, but it might be able to flip from A to B. That makes sense. I'm not a geneticist. It's kind of hard to explain, but certain genes can be turned on or off with nutrition. And I think that might explain some of what is happening. And two, with fawns that are born into really good situations where the doe has a lot of nutrition, she's able to provide more milk than the fawn even needs, and that fawn grows up basically with a silver spoon in its mouth. Those deer tend to grow bigger and have bigger antlers, and so it could
Sounds like you're pointing in the direction of stress being an impact as well, compared to just what they're eating and their health. But maybe if they're in a less stressful environment, that can contribute to that as well. Because they're, something's always after them,
Seems like going from survival mode to, flourishing mode. It's like, oh, I've got enough just to survive on. I've actually got more than I need to survive on. So I can, I guess flip the gene or go from A to B, from little horns to big horns.
So Emily, we're kind of like citizen scientists around here. We like learning from you guys that know all this, and then we're trying to apply it on our own places.
Yeah.
And, Lanny's got a place he's managing. Dudley's got a place. We've all got place. Max, we've all got little places. Everyone's a little bit different. But can an average guy? I'd like to learn telltale signs. We know about browse lines. We know that. But if you're an average guy and you're sitting there and your does have twins, have 2 fawns for the most part. Can you take from that hey, that my habitat must be in pretty good shape? Or if most of the does just have 1, is that an indicator?
Possibly. So deer are predisposed to having twins, so that's their norm. And so if you have a doe with just 1, it could be that she didn't have the nutrition to be able to raise both. So she may have had 2 and then lost 1. Or, it could point to predation. There might be high predation in the area. So it may not necessarily be nutrition. But if you have does with 3 fawns and she raises those 3 fawns, I would say that's probably a pretty good indicator that your habitat is pretty healthy. But I wouldn't put too much influence on the number of fawns that she has.
Yeah, I had a doe with 3 this year, and I wondered. So I managed to convince myself, well, probably another mother got killed, and she adopted one of these 3. I guess you just never know. Emily, you're making all these points, and it could be depredation. It could be that there wasn't enough, but when you see one with 3, I don't know that you can.
Will a doe pick up an abandoned fawn?
That's a good question. I'd assume they would.
I'm not sure.
Me neither.
I'm not sure about that one.
Mac, do you know? Would you check that?
Yeah, let me ask my doe friends.
I assume that they would.
There is something to it's you're not really shooting for genetics. It's kind of like shooting that 3-year-old 7-point. It is a mouth.
You're taking a mouth,
and
off
it's
the
taking in
landscape.
resources. But I want to say there was a study or 2 on spikes. It often takes them a year or 2 more to come into fruition. So, a buck that may be an 8-point in its first year has a better chance of having a full size set of antlers by the time it's 4 or 5, whereas that spike may take 6 to 8 years to where it.
And you got to think it's got to depend on what time of year they were born in too. It seems like,
Yeah, in the South, often the fawns come into heat in their first year, and it's a couple of months after the normal rut. So that fawn is going to be 2 months behind.
Did you have a question, Larry?
Well, talking about antlers and talking about different traits of them, it always comes back. The question always comes back to me is minerals. The feed in the Comanche study, was there a mineral package that went along with that, or was it just pure protein? And I guess, I know it's widely viewed that they can't prove that, an active mineral program will help the quality of the antlers. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I know that there were some minerals added in. I can't quite remember which ones. But our feed I know it had corn, cottonseed, and I think alfalfa. And so our feed was actually specially formulated for our study. It did have, a lot of if you go to the store and buy a bag of feed, it was very similar, but ours was a little bit different because it needed to have a certain isotope signature. So basically we were able to take deer tissues to determine how much feed they were eating. So that was also another part of my research. So our feed was a little bit different. So it needed to have that special isotope signature in it. But yeah.
Lenny, do you know what an isotope is?
I do not. Do you know what an isotope is? It's something that lets her track what she needs to track.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
So if you were consulting a private landowner, would you recommend mineral sites in addition to supplemental feeding or in addition to food plots?
I try not to steer people in one direction or another, especially when it comes to minerals. I usually tell them it's not going to hurt anything as far as nutrition wise. But minerals can be so site specific that it's hard to know exactly which minerals are limiting.
Gotcha.
So I hate to tell people to spend money on mineral blocks when it may not even do anything. But if your site is limiting in a certain mineral, it could help. So it's hard to say.
It depends. We hear this a lot.
Well, I mean,
it depends. Absolutely.
I don't, more of something isn't always necessarily good.
Right.
We're talking about to cure a deficiency if it exists.
Right. And how to even know if it does exist.
Under average conditions, deficiencies don't really exist unless there's something in the soil making something more limited.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to think that having it there doesn't hurt. I can get photographs of these deer while they're licking on those minerals and salt. So,
Well, Bobby put it. I mean, do you take a multivitamin, Bobby?
You know, I go through phases where I do sometimes, but I see the benefit of doing them.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
in the plant world, which is not the animal world, but if you put too much micros in your soil, it can affect the plant's growth.
Yeah.
It can become toxic really quick. Like boron, for example, you're only putting 1 pound an acre out. Think about that.
That's
barely
little,
any.
Yeah. How do you even get that much out on that?
I mean, it's a toxic substance.
Yeah.
You put too much out and it'll be a bare spot where nothing will grow. So,
Emily, what should we be asking you about antlers?
I don't know. I feel like we've covered a good bit of it.
So can we transition just a little bit? What about deer diseases? So we've got EHD. We all worry about that from time to time. We hear about. We're paying attention to CWD. Not wanting to go down that rabbit hole, but are there any others that we need to be paying attention to?
I get a lot. Most of what people have asked me about, the landowners that I work with, they usually send me pictures of deer because, and a lot of times it'll be deer that look like they have mange or like they're missing hair. So I get that question quite a bit. But deer can get mange. It's a specific kind of mange to deer, but they can also get different. There's other diseases that can affect hair loss. So it's always hard as a biologist to say exactly what the issue is from a picture. So usually you would need to actually sample that deer. So actually get your hands on it and take a sample to determine exactly what causes it. But I get that question a good bit.
Do you guys have any kind of formula, recommendations or anything if a guy's got a lot of ticks on his deer to help there?
Not as far as like feeding them something specifically. There was some research done looking at prescribed fire and tick density.
Oh yeah.
So managing, again, it goes back to managing your habitat, I think would be more important, and managing your deer density too.
Burn in the summer.
I'm always relating stuff to plants, So, for example, in the plant world, you could feed a systemic insecticide to that plant, but oftentimes it's just stressed for some reason. So maybe you planted that tree too deeply and it's stressed and it's throwing out these signals. So, that fire is going to get rid of ticks, but it's also going to make the habitat and the food sources better. Mm-hmm. So if those animals aren't stressed, they're going to be less apt to have something parasitic, try to take over. Those insects and things always seem to go to the more stressed individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I want to say that study suggested burning in the growing season, because that's when ticks are doing their behavior where they climb up to the ends of the vegetation. So they're more likely to get burned during the growing season versus the winter when they're kind of down underneath the leaves. Mm-hmm. I wish I remembered where that came from. I know I've read it before.
We've talked about
sense,
it.
Yeah.
We've talked about it on the podcast.
It gets confusing because a lot of our biologist friends are podcasters, and they may discuss it, but it wasn't their publication. And so I remember Marcus Lashley talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
What you got, Mac?
So I've got a question for you on seed, Emily. So being a gardener, do you think that deer prefer non-GMO, like row crop seeds, like sweet corn, versus your traditional, big ag corn?
Yeah, I don't know if it would taste different to them or not, because they can pick up on things in vegetation that we obviously can't. So they have like certain feedback loops. I don't know if it's a taste or it makes them feel a certain way. Why do they eat certain plants and they don't eat others? They've got some sort of feedback loop. But I don't know. I don't know about GMOs versus the others.
Would you do a non-GMO in your garden, or would you plant a Roundup ready corn?
Probably whatever I could find at the store that day. I don't know if I don't know.
Lanny, you got another question?
Nah.
Yep. What, Dudley? What about you?
No, that's an interesting subject, Mike.
It is interesting.
It
very
really
interesting.
is.
Well,
But
people sometimes wonder and worry about, a big field of a big field of soybeans out there that have been GMO'd
And sprayed.
and
Right.
and the deer are out there browsing on that. Does that have any negative effects? And I'm looking at you, Emily. Do you ever think about that?
I have, but I don't know what the answer is. And two, like, are they able to taste some of those chemicals that are being sprayed on the plants?
Mhm.
I think at first, I want to say there was some work done, and they're able to detect it at first, but after a while, not so much. Don't quote me on that though.
I mean, personally, heirloom varieties of corn taste better to me than field corn. So, I mean, I don't know why a deer wouldn't think it tasted
yeah,
better.
I don't know if it's the GMO aspect or
Right.
not. It's just that it was bred to make oil and
Mhm.
fuel and things like that
Yeah.
versus
Being a forage.
these open pollinated varieties of yesteryear and hopefully more to come are selected for different reasons. A higher sugar content but it's interesting what Dr. Emily said. Toxie mentioned that a deer's stomach is more connected to their brain than a human is.
Yeah.
And that's a really neat layman's terms way of saying what she did is
Yeah.
they're more in touch. Their body is more in touch with what they eat. And it somehow tells them that they need to eat more of this and less of that.
Selective browsing in this?
My brain tells me I need
I need a
more candy
cheeseburger,
and
yeah.
cheeseburgers and Coca-Colas.
Emily, is there something that you said, surely these guys are going to ask me about this? Is there any question that you think that we would find very interesting about antlers or anything about white-tailed
A
deer?
white-tailed deer, yeah, period. What do you find most fascinating about white-tailed deer?
Some of my PhD research was on deer behavior, and so I watched a lot of videos of deer at these feeders. So it was really what was most interesting to me was to watch their interactions with each other and how they have this dominance hierarchy that honestly is well established before we're putting these cameras out to get these videos. So it's interesting to me that, they don't even have to have any kind of specific interaction. They have like this established dominance already. So, and you see it a lot with bucks, like they'll just kind of walk into a feeder. They don't have to drop their ears back. They don't have to stare. They just walk in and other deer just scatter.
Leave.
So that's always just the dynamics there is interesting to me and how they have different personalities.
I've got an interesting question, I think. Have you ever noticed that certain bucks on a property just don't ever visit feeders, whereas some of them
Yes.
do?
Ooh.
I have.
That's good to know.
What's going on there, you think?
Yeah, what do you think's going on there?
I don't, I'm not sure. I don't know why they do that. It could have to do with feeder placement sometimes. If the feeder's out in the middle of your food plot, you might see fewer deer using it because it's out in the open versus if you put it at the edge of the woods, maybe you'd see more action there. I don't know.
We've talked about this last week. Do you think there are certain deer that avoid cameras and camera sites?
I don't know. So on our research project in Texas, we had ear tags on most of our deer, so we knew who was who. And occasionally we would have deer in there that would never show up on camera, but it wasn't very often. They usually showed up on camera.
But this was a high fence?
It was, yeah.
I do think if deer have grown up around them, it makes a big difference. And I could see it if a deer just had never encountered a camera and he walked by and he felt something flash or
a red light went off.
Yeah, something that could, if he'd never, but if he'd grown up as a button buck around them, and I think it's the same way with feeders. If they've grown up around them, then they're used to them.
Yeah.
Emily, are you one of these people that names your deer? So if you've got a hunting club, you've got Dagger and you've got Prancer and all.
Mossy Tip.
I name them to the extent of when I'm doing a camera survey, I'll name them somewhat so I know who's who as far as like I can figure out how many unique bucks I have so I can get back to a deer density. Is the names though that people come up with cracks me up. Like,
Yeah,
I love it.
double drop tine and yeah.
What was Jeff Lindsay's?
it was the name of it was a hammer brand.
Yeah. What was it?
East
Swing.
East Swing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was a hammer.
Yeah, we had to ask what that was.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
I think Mac knew what it was.
well,
You had to ask Mac.
yeah, Mike, did you really know that?
Well, I knew what it was. I think Rob was the one that chimed in on
Yeah.
it.
Oh, Rob Kenny. Wow. Look at that.
I get a little. Sometimes I get a little tired on the name. So,
Coming from Hercules.
Yeah, coming from Hercules
Yeah.
over here. Oh, yeah.
I don't know, but sometimes I do, and for the most part, I enjoy them. But do you understand? I mean, I'm not communicating that, but sometimes you'll see a post on Facebook. I got old Dagger.
The posts on Facebook get on my nerves, period. But yeah. I do like naming them, especially with the kids, because they're like, oh,
It
there's
just
old.
helps you remember the,
Yeah.
the deer that you've got at your place. Old no brow and
The one.
know.
We still talk about the one at my house.
Yeah.
Every time. we
tall
go hunting.
boy.
Yeah.
Just whatever makes it easier to, put a
Tall boy.
personality on
I like that. I'm
Yeah.
gonna use that one.
Yeah,
Tall
high
boy.
tower. Wide
Will
load.
Smith.
Yeah. Emily, give us a name from one of your places. What's the name of a buck over there?
Preacher.
Preacher.
Now,
Talk
why would
about
you?
him.
Yeah, why would you name him Preacher?
I don't know. I didn't come up with it.
Some people just give them a name, and a lot of folks seem to. It's something about that deer that makes
Yeah.
them name it that.
Yeah. Speaking of, is Pork Chop showed back up?
No, I hadn't seen Pork Chop.
Hadn't seen Pork Chop.
No. They had a deer named Pork Chop because he was a big old fat deer.
He looked delicious.
Yeah.
So we called him Pork Chop.
All right, guys. Well, I think we've about exhausted
Yeah.
our questions, and I think she's probably a little tired
Yeah,
of us
she's
by
tired.
now.
Yeah, I guarantee she's
Yeah.
tired of us by now.
We're asking a lot of questions. Emily, we hear great things about you. It sounds like you're enjoying what you do for a living, and that you're helping people, and that there's got to be a lot of reward and satisfaction in that for you.
There is, absolutely. I love working with properties and seeing them evolve over the years and really grow. And it is really rewarding.
Yeah. Do you still get to hunt with your dad?
I do. I actually hunted with him this past weekend. We went down to the hunt club, and our deer season went out yesterday here in South Carolina. So trying to get in a little bit of last minute hunting over the weekend. So
Does he still have to make sure you've got gloves and you got all this? What age does that kind of start taking care of itself? I'm curious.
probably never. I had to borrow his rifle this weekend. So
Lanny. It never ends.
No, yeah. It never ends.
Yeah. Well,
The only
Emily,
thing that Hayden always has is snacks. We went through his snack bag yesterday in the stand, and I'm like, son, you could live for 2 years off what you got in this bag.
Oh, that's good. Well, Emily, enjoy your time with your dad. That's pretty special.
It's good stuff.
It really is. Emily, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks for being here.
thank y'all. Had a
Yeah,
great
that was a
time.
good one.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch with you. We'll get you a shirt sent. Looking around the room, why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Richie.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast, and be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.